The first time Karen measured my fence, she brought a tape measure like she was checking for uranium leak. She stood at the corner of my yard in a floral sun hat, eyes narrowed, the yellow tape stretched taut against the cedar planks. 6 feet, she announced to no one in particular, her voice dripping with triumph. That's 1 foot higher than HOA code. She said it loud enough for her little audience, 2 other board members pretending to walk their dogs, to hear. I was sipping coffee on the porch, half amused, half dreading where this was going. Around here, small victories over neighbors were treated like Olympic medals. The fence was brand new, built a month after I moved in. My house sat at the edge of the cul-de-sac, slightly elevated, with a slope that meant one side needed taller posts to stay level. The contractor measured correctly, pulled permits, and even used HOA-approved materials. But logic doesn't stand a chance against someone like Karen, the self-appointed sheriff of suburbia. Her entire sense of purpose was wrapped up in enforcing rules that gave her a whisper of authority. Power was her oxygen, and my fence had cut off her supply. She filed the first complaint that afternoon. The HOA notice arrived 2 days later, printed on ivory paper with an embossed seal, like it was a royal decree. Your fence exceeds allowable height restrictions as stated in Article 7b, Section 3. Failure to comply, it said, would result in fines, liens, and legal action. I laughed. Not the bitter kind, just that quiet, stunned laugh you let out when someone tries to sue you over gravity. I sent them photos, permits, and an engineer's note confirming the slope. I thought that would end it. Rookie mistake. The next week, Karen escalated. She parked across the street every morning, camera in hand, taking pictures of my yard like she was building a case for the Supreme Court. She even tried to peek over the fence using a step ladder. One morning, I caught her balancing awkwardly on the second rung, clutching a clipboard. You know, you could just knock, I said. She nearly fell off, muttered something about official inspection, and retreated. That was the day I realized this wasn't about the fence, it was about control. By week 3, the HOA sent a second and final warning. According to their measurements, my fence was 8.2 inches above permitted height. That precision alone told me who had been measuring. I called the property surveyor again, and he confirmed everything was within code. I even had him put it in writing, signed, stamped, dated. I sent it to the board, attached with a polite note, "Perhaps your ruler is broken." That line might have been my first mistake, though I can't say I regret it. Karen didn't take well to being mocked. The next HOA meeting was a spectacle. I didn't plan to attend until a neighbor texted, "You're on the agenda." I walked into the clubhouse to find a dozen people seated in folding chairs, and Karen at the head of the table like a judge about to sentence a war criminal. She'd even prepared a slideshow. The first slide was a zoomed-in photo of my fence. The second, a close-up of my property line. The third, for some reason, a stock image of a castle wall. "We're not a fortress community," she said dramatically. "We're a family neighborhood." When I asked to speak, she sighed like she was granting mercy. I explained the slope, the permit, the measurements, all factual, all calm. The other members nodded politely, but Karen wasn't listening. She just stared at me with that smug half-smile that said, "I will win eventually." The vote to uphold the complaint passed 3-2. I was ordered to lower my fence within 30 days. I left without saying a word. Because while Karen celebrated her victory, I was already planning my counterstrike. I spent the next week studying the HOA handbook. Every line, every clause, every comma. By day 4, I found what I needed, the decorative structure exception. It stated that walls or structures built for aesthetic or landscaping purposes were exempt from height limits, provided they were non-habitable. My brain started connecting dots faster than caffeine could keep up. If Karen wanted to play technical, I'd play architectural. She wanted my fence shorter. I'd make it taller legally. The plan started small. I contacted a local stonemason, asked about materials, permits, and zoning boundaries. When I mentioned I wanted to build a decorative retaining wall, he grinned. Castle style? He asked, half joking. Exactly, I said. He didn't even blink. We've done worse. By the end of the month, pallets of limestone and mortar lined my driveway. The first day the crew arrived, Karen was outside instantly, phone in hand, documenting every move. I waved. She didn't wave back. As the foundation took shape, her outrage evolved from curiosity to disbelief. The structure wasn't technically attached to the fence. It stood a few feet inside my property line, tiered like battlements. The mason even installed faux arrow slits for drainage. My neighbors started calling it the fortress. Karen called it a blight. She filed 3 more complaints before realizing the loophole. The wall was decorative, not a fence. It met every line of code she'd cited. The HOA attorney confirmed it. I received a short letter that simply said, "No violation found." Karen, on the other hand, received silence. I could see her pacing outside some evenings, arms crossed, staring at my new stone wall like it had personally betrayed her. The sound of masonry tools must have haunted her dreams. By the time the last block was laid, the structure stood 7 feet high, capped with carved stone trim that caught the sunlight beautifully. I planted ivy at the base, knowing it would take years to crawl over the surface, but patience was my weapon. When the mason handed me the final invoice, he chuckled. "You know, this thing's gonna outlast the HOA." I smiled. "That's the idea." Karen tried one last desperate move. She posted a community-wide email accusing me of destroying neighborhood harmony. I replied with a single sentence, "The wall's for everyone's protection." That line spread faster than gossip. A few neighbors even thanked me for finally standing up to her. I didn't intend to start a movement, but it happened anyway. And yet, even as I admired my handiwork, I knew Karen wasn't done. People like her never concede. They retreat, regroup, and come back sharper. The real battle wasn't about the wall anymore. It was about the principle. The moment she lost control, she would find a new way to reclaim it. I could feel the next storm brewing long before the first HOA letter arrived again, stamped urgent. The letter didn't mention the wall this time. It said my new landscaping lights violated aesthetic guidelines. Which was strange, because I hadn't installed any. Not yet. But I would. I didn't install the lights until 2 weeks after the second complaint arrived. It felt poetic, getting fined for something that didn't exist yet, then making it exist just to spite the paperwork. The electrician thought I was kidding when I asked for subtle, architectural lighting with castle-style sconces. I wasn't. We mounted low-voltage LEDs along the stone wall's edges, casting a soft golden glow over the limestone. It looked cinematic, like a medieval courtyard at dusk. My wife called it the most ridiculous act of passive aggression I've ever seen. I told her it was civic engagement. Predictably, Karen lost her mind. The first night the lights turned on, I heard her from across the street yelling at her husband. "He's turning the whole block into Disneyland." I peeked out the window and caught her taking pictures again. The next morning, another HOA email went out, subject line, "Excessive exterior illumination." She claimed my lights were polluting the neighborhood ambience and disrupting the nocturnal ecosystem. It was impressive how quickly she could weaponize vocabulary. I half expected her to cite international treaties. I knew how this game worked by now. So before she could file an official complaint, I preempted her with my own. I documented her repeated trespassing and harassment, submitted timestamps, witness accounts, and even screenshots of her public posts in the neighborhood forum. The HOA couldn't ignore it this time. They scheduled a mediation session, me, Karen, and 2 neutral board members. I arrived early, dressed like I was there for a job interview. Karen arrived late, carrying a binder thick enough to stop a bullet. The meeting started civilly enough. The board chair, a tired man who looked like he regretted every unpaid volunteer hour, tried to keep order. Karen launched into her presentation, flipping through color-coded tabs. He's built a fortress. He's lighting it up like a monument. This isn't a home, it's a spectacle. Her voice trembled with righteous outrage. When it was my turn, I simply slid a single folder across the table. All within code. All documented. And unlike Karen, I haven't violated anyone's property lines. The room went quiet. The chair skimmed the papers, sighed, and closed the folder. No violations found, he said. Karen's face turned the color of a stop sign. That should have ended it. But people like Karen don't lose, they metastasize. A week later, she began a campaign disguised as community improvement. Flyers appeared in mailboxes urging residents to preserve neighborhood integrity. At first, it sounded harmless. Then I noticed she'd used a photo of my house, my wall, under a caption that read, "Don't let this happen to us." That's when it turned personal. I considered ignoring it. But something about seeing my home used as propaganda flipped a switch in me. I decided if she wanted a war of perception, I'd fight it on my terms. I printed my own flyers. Sleek, minimalist, sarcastic. Support local architecture. Real stone. Real drama. I left them on doorsteps and community bulletin boards. My version went viral, not online, but in the kind of whispered, conspiratorial way that spreads faster than official memos. Half the neighborhood thought it was hilarious. The other half thought I'd finally snap. Either way, everyone was talking about Karen's crusade, and not in a flattering light. Then came the real twist. At the next HOA meeting, 2 new board members were elected, both of them neighbors who'd grown tired of Karen's antics. One of them, a retired contractor named Phil, openly called her out during roll call. "You can't enforce rules you don't understand, Karen," he said. The room actually clapped. It was the first time I'd seen her speechless. That small crack in her authority was intoxicating. But power vacuums have consequences. With her influence waning, Karen grew unpredictable. She started filing anonymous complaints about trivial things, unsightly garden gnomes, improper trash can positioning, even unauthorized bird feeders. It was obvious who was behind them, but the volume was ridiculous. The HOA's system flagged her account for excessive submissions. I didn't even need to retaliate. She was dismantling herself. I thought I'd finally reached equilibrium, until the morning I found paint splattered across my wall. Bright blue, thick and dripping down the limestone like melted sky. It wasn't random vandalism. It was deliberate, targeted, and fresh. I checked my security footage and saw her car headlights at 2:14 a.m., parking across the street for 10 minutes. The camera didn't catch her directly, but it didn't need to. The timing was perfect, the motive obvious. My wife begged me to let it go. But that's the thing about principle, it doesn't care about peace. Instead of scrubbing it off, I called a friend who owned a pressure washing business. He agreed to help in a very visible way. That Saturday morning, we set up hoses, pumps, and a massive generator. The noise echoed down the cul-de-sac. Karen came storming out in a robe, hair half done, shouting over the roar. "This is harassment," she screamed. I shouted back, "Just cleaning up community improvements." The neighbors came out one by one, watching like it was a live performance. Some even brought coffee. When the blue paint finally peeled away, the wall looked even better, cleaner, brighter, almost defiant. I figured that public humiliation would end it. But Karen wasn't done being creative. 2 days later, a city code inspector showed up at my door. "We received a report of an unpermitted structure," he said, clipboard in hand. I invited him in, offered coffee, and gave him the full tour. By the time he left, he was shaking his head. "You're fine," he said. "Somebody's wasting our time." He didn't say who, but we both knew. I slipped him a business card. "In case you ever want to see what she does next," I said. He laughed. Karen must have realized her official channels were drying up because that's when she turned to social media. She started a neighborhood Facebook group, Preserve Pinewood Estates. filled with long, self-pitying posts about entitled homeowners destroying community values. She never named me directly, but every photo, every complaint, every passive-aggressive comment pointed right to my castle wall. The best part? The group wasn't private. Within days, her posts were being screenshot and shared on r/suburban drama. I didn't post them, but I certainly didn't stop anyone else from doing it. The fallout was glorious. Someone even made a meme comparing Karen's HOA crusade to a medieval siege. It showed her face photoshopped onto a knight yelling at a castle wall with the caption, "Thou shalt not exceed 6 feet." The meme went local viral. Teenagers were laughing about it at the grocery store. When she found out, she tried to have the group taken down. That only made it worse. You can't out-yell the internet. At this point, I should have felt victorious. But part of me started wondering what Karen's life was actually like outside the drama. I learned she'd been on the HOA board for over a decade. Her husband barely participated in meetings, always sitting silently beside her. They didn't seem happy, just committed to a performance they'd forgotten how to stop. For the first time, I felt something like pity. It didn't last long, but it was there. Then, the biggest twist yet, an official notice from the HOA announcing Karen's temporary leave due to personal reasons. No details. No meeting. Just gone. The rumor mill exploded. Some said the stress got to her. Others claimed she was forced out after a confrontation with Phil. I didn't dig for truth. I just stood by my wall that evening, lights glowing softly against the stone, and thought about how quiet the neighborhood suddenly felt. The silence was strange, almost fragile. Of course, quiet never lasts in Pinewood Estates. A week later, a new face appeared at my door. HOA interim president, clipboard in hand, smile rehearsed. "We'd like to discuss your plans for the gate you're adding," he said. I blinked. What gate? He held up a printed form, one I'd never filled out. Karen's name wasn't on it, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Even in exile, she was still playing. Somewhere out there, she was plotting her return. That's when I decided to go bigger. If she wanted a reason to come back, I'd give her one she couldn't resist. Something so audacious, so legally untouchable, that she'd choke on her own outrage. I didn't know what it was yet, but as I watched the light slide across my castle wall that evening, I knew this wasn't over. The fence war had evolved. Now it was about legacy. Karen's return wasn't announced, it was felt. Like humidity before a storm. The HOA newsletter reappeared in everyone's inbox one quiet Tuesday afternoon, signed Acting President, Karen L. I nearly spit out my coffee. She wasn't just back, she'd promoted herself. No meeting, no vote, just a self-declared coup. The board must have been too exhausted to fight her off. Or maybe she'd found some procedural loophole. Either way, the Queen had reclaimed her throne, and I knew she'd come for me first. Her first order of business was subtle but deliberate. Neighborhood Aesthetic Enforcement Phase 2. The phrasing alone gave away her fingerprints, bureaucratic, self-righteous, and vaguely threatening. She'd created a new subcommittee for visual harmony, a task force of her closest loyalists, whose sole mission seemed to be making my life inconvenient. Within a week, I'd received 3 new letters. One about my mailbox being non-conforming, another about overgrown vegetation, and one that simply read, "Your property gives off an aura of defiance." That last one almost made me frame it. At first, I ignored them, but the sheer persistence was almost impressive. Karen had learned from her last defeat. This time, she wasn't attacking the wall directly. She was nibbling around the edges, waiting for a weak point. That's when I decided to stop reacting and start orchestrating. I'd already built a castle. Now it was time to act like a strategist inside one. My plan began with research. Over the years, I'd gathered more HOA documents than any sane person should own. Meeting minutes, financial records, voting results, all technically public if you knew where to ask. Buried in those files, I discovered something Karen had overlooked. She'd been signing off reimbursements for community beautification projects that never actually existed. Thousands of dollars allocated to non-existent flower beds and committee travel expenses. It wasn't illegal exactly, but it looked bad. And more importantly, it would feel bad to anyone who already disliked her. I wasn't out to ruin her life, just her reputation within her favorite kingdom. So I began planting seeds. Quietly, methodically. I slipped a few anonymous summaries into the hands of residents who loved gossip more than gardening. Within days, whispers turned to murmurs. People started asking questions at meetings. "Hey Karen, where'd the landscaping fund go?" She brushed them off, but her composure cracked a little each time. Her empire was built on perception, and perception was crumbling. Meanwhile, I started a new project, one that would double as bait. I called it Operation Gatekeeper. Using the decorative exemption clause again, I designed an elaborate stone archway at the entrance of my driveway, purely ornamental, according to the paperwork. The design included wrought iron gates that didn't even close. They were permanently open, purely aesthetic, but visually dramatic. They gave the impression of privacy without violating a single rule. I even got city approval before construction began. When the foundation was poured, Karen's car appeared like clockwork. She parked, stared for 5 minutes, and left without a word. The next day, her task force dropped off a notice requesting structural details for review. I sent them a signed letter from the city inspector and a copy of the decorative exemption clause she hated so much. She didn't respond, but that silence was loud. She was cornered again. That's when the situation turned unexpectedly public. Phil, the retired contractor who'd once humiliated her during a meeting, decided to run for HOA president. He knocked on doors, shook hands, and promised transparency. For the first time in years, people actually seemed excited about an election. Karen, predictably, saw it as betrayal. She sent a mass email warning residents about agitators seeking to dismantle community order. Phil replied all with a single sentence: "I'd rather dismantle your nonsense." It was glorious. As campaign season heated up, my wall and gate became symbols of rebellion. Neighbors I'd never spoken to before stopped by to compliment the craftsmanship. A few even asked for referrals. Karen's power wasn't just slipping, it was being mocked. And the more she lashed out, the worse she looked. At one point, she tried to host a community cleanup day, but only 3 people showed up, 2 of whom left after realizing they were the cleanup crew. Meanwhile, I finished my gate. It was beautiful, arched stone columns with a custom plaque reading Fort Serenity. A little tongue-in-cheek, a little regal. At night, the lights illuminated it like a monument. Karen couldn't stand it. The very next day, she personally showed up at my doorstep, clipboard in hand, expression tight as wire. "I need to inspect the new structure," she said. "Of course," I replied, smiling. "But just so you know, entering my property without permission would violate Section 8C of the HOA Charter. You wrote that one, remember?" Her jaw twitched. "I'm not entering, I'm observing." "From the sidewalk, then." She hovered there, visibly fuming but unable to argue. She scribbled something on her clipboard and stomped off. I watched her go, knowing full well she'd already lost the psychological war. Because here's the thing. Karen thrived on confrontation she could control. Deny her that, and she unraveled. But I wasn't done. My next move was theatrical. I filed a formal request with the HOA to host a Community Historical Appreciation Day, complete with guided tours of architectural features inspired by European heritage. It sounded educational, wholesome, utterly harmless. And because Karen couldn't risk looking discriminatory or biased, she had to approve it. When the day arrived, I went all in. I set up banners, refreshments, and a few lawn chairs. Dozens of neighbors came by, curious. I gave light-hearted tours of my stonework, joking about medieval engineering and HOA diplomacy. People laughed, took photos, and shared them online. My wall, once a symbol of defiance, became a neighborhood landmark. Even local real estate agents mentioned it in listings. Karen showed up halfway through, of course, looking like she'd bitten into a lemon. She stood across the street, arms folded, watching as her authority turned into entertainment. Someone offered her lemonade, she refused. When a kid asked if the wall had a dungeon, I said, only for bad bylaws. The laughter that followed practically echoed off the stone. By the end of the week, Phil had officially won the election. Karen's defeat wasn't just official, it was absolute. Her resignation email was terse, emotionless, and riddled with passive-aggressive undertones. Due to evolving community values, it read, I am stepping down from my role to focus on personal matters. Translation, she'd been outmaneuvered. For a few blissful weeks, the neighborhood felt normal, peaceful, even. I'd wake up to sunlight bouncing off the wall, hear kids playing, see neighbors waving instead of whispering. It almost felt like a victory lap. But deep down, I knew better. Karen wasn't the type to fade quietly. She'd wait, simmer, and find a new way to reclaim control. People like her don't move on, they rebrand. Sure enough, one evening while walking my dog, I spotted a for sale sign on her lawn. I thought maybe she was finally leaving. Then I looked closer. The name on the listing wasn't hers, it was her husband's. I did some digging and found out he'd filed the paperwork himself. Divorce. She wasn't just losing power, she was losing her stage. You'd think that would make me feel triumphant. It didn't. Watching her unravel from afar, I realized I'd become part of the same cycle, feeding off her chaos, matching her move for move. The war had consumed us both, even if I'd come out ahead. I stood by my gate that night, staring at the glow of the wall, wondering if I'd built a monument or a mirror. Then my phone buzzed. A new email notification, from Karen. Subject line, you won. No body text. No attachments. Just those 2 words. I read it twice, then deleted it. Not because it meant nothing, but because it meant everything. Still, something told me it wasn't the end. People like Karen never vanish, they retreat into the shadows, waiting for the next petty crusade to justify their existence. And if I'd learned anything from this ridiculous saga, it was that peace in Pinewood Estates was always temporary. Sure enough, the next morning, I woke to find something new nailed to the community board. A notice about upcoming neighborhood safety enhancements, signed by Karen L., community consultant. The Queen was back, just wearing a different crown. Karen's new title, community consultant, sounded harmless enough, like someone who'd help with landscaping advice or recycling schedules. But I knew better. She had found a way to slip back into the HOA without technically being in charge, a puppet master without a crown. Her name didn't appear on any official document this time, but her fingerprints were all over the new safety initiative. The first sign was the email about neighborhood surveillance enhancements. It claimed the HOA would be testing camera placement for better visibility of common areas. The phrasing was vague, the tone suspiciously cheerful. Then, the next morning, a contractor showed up outside my house with a pole and a security camera labeled temporary installation. The camera pointed directly at my driveway. I didn't need a decoder ring to know who'd ordered it. I walked outside, coffee in hand, and asked the guy who'd sent him. Some lady from the committee, he said. Short blonde hair, floral clipboard. Of course, Karen's camouflage might have changed, but her obsession with control hadn't. I called the HOA office, demanding documentation. The new president, Phil, sounded exasperated. We didn't authorize individual installations, he said. This must be part of that pilot program Karen pitched before she left. She's not gone, I said. She's watching. Phil sighed. Can you give me a week? I'll clean this up. But a week was a long time in HOA warfare. I decided to handle it my way. That night, I waited until the street was empty and rotated the camera 45 degrees, away from my driveway, directly toward Karen's front lawn. I didn't touch the wiring, didn't damage anything. Just a gentle re-aiming of perspective. The next morning, it was facing my driveway again. This silent tug-of-war went on for 3 days, each of us resetting the camera under the cover of darkness. By day 4, I'd had enough. I set up my own motion-activated floodlights, perfectly legal, according to the handbook. Every time her safety camera moved, my system lit up like a stadium. Within 2 nights, Karen's front windows looked like a paparazzi ambush. That's when the neighborhood finally noticed. People started talking, first about the lights, then about the cameras, then about the sudden wave of new HOA safety memos. Someone posted screenshots of the emails on our community Facebook page, connecting the dots. Why is everything signed by a consultant instead of the board? One neighbor asked. Another replied, because the consultant is the board. The thread exploded. Phil called me the next morning. I think I owe you an apology, he said. Turns out Karen's been signing contracts under the old authorization code. We've got a mess. How bad? She's hired private contractors using HOA funds, without approval. Cameras, signage, even those ridiculous reflective vests for her so-called safety patrol. I laughed. You're telling me she created her own private HOA militia? Basically, yes. And they want to patrol the neighborhood this weekend. That was my breaking point. I'd tolerated her measuring tapes, her letters, her paint. But self-appointed patrols? That crossed the line from petty to dystopian. I told Phil to let it happen. Don't cancel it, I said. Let her play security queen. I'll handle the rest. Saturday arrived bright and quiet. At 9 a.m., Karen and her volunteers emerged, 5 retirees in neon vests and clipboards. They moved in formation down the street, inspecting lawns, photographing cars, jotting notes. One of them even carried a walkie-talkie. The scene was absurd, and I knew exactly how to weaponize it. I called my friend Mark, a local journalist who ran a small-town podcast about civic absurdities. You still covering weird suburban stories? I asked. Always, he said. Within an hour, Mark and his cameraman were parked down the street, recording footage of Pinewood's volunteer patrol. Karen, mistaking them for supporters, smiled and waved, proudly explaining her mission to keep the community safe from noncompliance. She didn't realize who they were until the questions turned sharp. So, what legal authority do you have to film private homes? Mark asked. And where's your official badge? By that evening, the segment was live online under the title, HOA Gone Wild, Meet the Neighborhood Patrol No One Asked For. The comments were brutal. Neighbors shared it like wildfire. Someone made a parody TikTok of Karen directing imaginary traffic. By Sunday, the board's inbox was flooded with angry emails demanding her removal. Karen tried to spin it. She sent a long clarification email, blaming miscommunication and misrepresentation by the media. But no one bought it. Phil called an emergency meeting, this time at the clubhouse, to address consultant misconduct. The place was packed. When Karen walked in, she looked tired but still defiant, clutching a stack of papers like a shield. She tried to open with her usual confident tone, but every sentence was met with murmurs. Then Phil stood up. We've reviewed your expenditures, he said. Nearly $6,000 in unauthorized spending. Cameras, uniforms, and a catering bill. Her face reddened. That was for the volunteer breakfast. Which you held at your own house, Phil said. And billed as a community event. For the first time since I'd known her, Karen faltered. Not because she was guilty, she probably still thought she was right, but because her audience had turned on her. The illusion of authority shattered right there under fluorescent light. I didn't speak during the meeting. I didn't have to. My wall, my lights, and her own ego had done all the work. When the motion to revoke her consultant's status passed unanimously, even her former allies stayed silent. She left before the vote concluded, head down, papers clutched tight, like someone evacuating a sinking ship. I thought that was the end of it, Until 3 days later, when a new HOA newsletter went out, unsigned, with the headline, "Change is Coming to Pinewood Estates." It had no details, just vague promises of community reform and new leadership initiatives. It wasn't from Karen officially, but it carried her tone, the same dramatic cadence, the same manipulative optimism. Something about it chilled me more than her open warfare ever had. Because now she'd learned stealth. No name, no title, no accountability. Just influence from the shadows. I realized too late that I'd created the monster she'd become. Every time I beat her publicly, I forced her to evolve privately. So I decided to end it differently this time, not with confrontation, but exposure. I compiled every incident, every document, every receipt into a single dossier and sent it to the County HOA Oversight Committee. Nothing exaggerated, nothing embellished, just fact. I didn't even include my name. A month later, a certified letter arrived. Notice of investigation into HOA governance irregularities. The board was suspended pending review. Karen's consultant role was declared null and void. Pinewood Estates was placed under temporary administrative supervision. In simple terms, the HOA had been dissolved. Neighbors celebrated with fireworks. I just sat on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the sparks light up the night. For the first time in years, the cul-de-sac felt free. No letters, no meetings, no tape measures. Just peace. Still, I couldn't help glancing toward Karen's darkened house. Her car was gone. Her curtains drawn. But on her mailbox, taped neatly, was a handwritten note that read, "Temporary absence, returning soon." I laughed softly. Because of course she was. People like Karen don't disappear. They hibernate. When the construction trucks showed up on the empty lot next to my property, I didn't think much of it at first. Pinewood Estates had been expanding for years. New families, new builds, new drama. But then I saw her, Karen, standing at the edge of the lot, arms crossed, giving orders to the workers like a general surveying her troops. I almost choked on my coffee. After everything, the wall, the cameras, the investigation, she was back. Not as a resident, not as a board member, but as a property owner. It took me 3 hours to confirm what I already suspected. The county's public records listed the new lot under KL Holdings LLC. Subtle, but not subtle enough. She'd created a shell company to buy land in the very neighborhood that had just kicked her out. It was genius in a deranged sort of way. Without an official residence, she couldn't rejoin the HOA board, but as a developer, she could attend meetings, influence zoning, and file endless construction variance requests. She'd found a new throne. By the end of the first week, the lot had been flattened, marked, and fenced off. Big banners appeared overnight. Future site of the Pinewood Pavilion, a community recreation space. I almost admired the audacity. She'd branded her personal construction project as a gift to the neighborhood. It was brilliant propaganda, turning her comeback into civic virtue. But I knew better. Karen didn't build anything that didn't serve her ego. A few days later, she appeared at my door. "I wanted to be neighborly," she said, voice dripping with false warmth. "I'll be your new next-door project manager." I leaned against the doorframe. "Didn't realize you were into community service now." "Oh, I've always been about community," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I just needed a better canvas." Her eyes flicked toward my wall, the monument to our last war. "Still proud of that eyesore?" she asked. "Still measuring things that don't belong to you?" I shot back. For a moment the mask slipped. Her expression hardened, the corners of her mouth tightening. Then she chuckled, low and fake. "You'll see. When the pavilion's done, people will finally appreciate what real harmony looks like." Harmony, in Karen's speak, meant control. Within a month, her pavilion started taking shape, a steel frame rising tall and defiant, visible from every angle of my property. At first, it looked like a small clubhouse. Then it grew. Taller. Wider. By week 6, It had the footprint of a full-fledged event hall. The noise was constant. Drills, hammers, generators, shouting. My mornings turned into construction alarms. My evenings ended with floodlights cutting through my windows. I filed a noise complaint with the county. Nothing happened. She had every permit in place. Everything about it was legal. And that's what made it infuriating. She wasn't breaking the rules anymore, she was mastering them. Phil stopped by one afternoon to check on me. "You see this nonsense?" he said, staring at the metal skeleton. "She's not just building a hall," I said. "She's building her stage." He nodded. "She's applied to host HOA events there, community meetings, charity drives, enrichment classes. If the county approves, she'll control the venue everyone has to use." "She's privatizing the HOA," I said. Phil exhaled heavily. "I hate to say it, but it's brilliant. She's found a way to hold power without title." I decided I needed to see the site up close. One evening after the workers had left, I slipped around the temporary fencing. The inside was bare, steel beams, concrete slabs, electrical wiring. But on one of the unfinished walls, someone had taped a blueprint. The title read, "Phase 2 Expansion, Karen's Corner Office." No joke. She wasn't even pretending this was a public project. The next morning, I sent copies of the blueprint to the county planning office, attached with a polite note. "Might want to check if public funds are being used for private amenities." A week later, an inspector visited the site. Karen followed him around, smiling sweetly, explaining everything was temporary. She charmed him, of course. The man left nodding, reassured. So I changed tactics. If she wanted a spotlight, I'd give her one, just not the kind she liked. I contacted my friend Mark again, the journalist who'd roasted her last time. "You still into follow-ups?" I asked. "Always," he said. We planned a feature story. The return of HOA Karen, now with heavy machinery. Mark didn't need to exaggerate. The footage spoke for itself. Cranes lifting beams, signs boasting community center, while workers installed a private office suite. The video went viral again. Locals couldn't believe she was back at it. That's when Karen showed her real face. She held a press conference in front of the half-built pavilion, inviting neighbors for refreshments and damage control. I went, of course. So did half the cul-de-sac. She stood at a podium, smiling like a campaign candidate. "This project," she declared, "is about unity. About rebuilding trust in our neighborhood after years of division." I raised my hand. "Division caused by who, exactly?" Her smile didn't falter. "By misunderstanding," she said. "But that's behind us now. This space will belong to everyone." "Then why does the blueprint say Karen's Corner Office?" I asked. The crowd murmured. Her composure flickered, just for a heartbeat. "That was an early draft," she said quickly. "A placeholder." "Funny placeholder," I said. "Especially for a public pavilion." She turned to the crowd, ignoring me. "Negativity won't stop progress," she announced. "Change takes leadership." That word, leadership, landed wrong with everyone. It sounded like a declaration, not a promise. The spell broke. People started whispering again. One woman muttered, "She's doing it again." Another said, "Didn't we vote her out?" Karen wrapped up the event fast, but the damage was done. The next morning, someone spray-painted on her construction fence, "Queen. Karen's Castle 2.0. She had it scrubbed off within hours, but more graffiti followed, crowns, slogans, joke. The site became a symbol again, just like my wall had been. Only this time, she was the one being walled in. Still, I couldn't shake a strange sense of déjà vu. The more she pushed, the more I reacted, and the cycle continued. I wanted to break it, but I also wanted to win. So I found her weak spot, pride. At the next county meeting, I signed up for public comment. Karen was there, presenting her community center proposal. When my turn came, I stood up, holding a printed quote from her own press conference. "Karen says this project will belong to everyone," I said. So I'm proposing the county designate it as a public-use facility under shared management, open access, open books, open leadership. The room buzzed. The officials nodded. Karen froze. She couldn't object without contradicting herself. Her own words had trapped her. The motion passed unanimously. By law, the Pinewood Pavilion was now a public venue. She couldn't profit from it, couldn't hold exclusive events, couldn't even lock the doors without county permission. In one stroke, her private kingdom became everyone's park. She confronted me afterward, eyes blazing. "You stole my project." "No," I said calmly. "I just made it live up to its name." For a long moment she said nothing. Then she smiled. Not the fake smile, but the quiet, dangerous kind that promised she wasn't finished. "You think you've won," she said softly. "But I'm not done building." And she wasn't bluffing. 2 weeks later, new trucks rolled in, not to the pavilion, but to her old property across the street. A smaller crew, quieter, more secretive. I watched them unload concrete blocks, lumber, and fencing panels. By sundown, a new foundation had been laid. No permits, no banners, just a sign that read, in clean black letters, "Private Residence, Under Construction." Karen was building again. And this time, whatever she was constructing wasn't meant to impress the neighborhood. It was meant for me. The first sign that Karen's new, private residence wasn't what it seemed came at 3 a.m., when the rumbling started. It wasn't loud enough to wake the whole neighborhood, just a steady mechanical growl that vibrated through my wall like a warning. I stepped onto the porch in my robe and saw construction lights glowing across the street, silhouettes moving behind her half-built foundation. Trucks, generators, men with headlamps. Karen wasn't just building, she was installing something. By morning, the noise was gone and the site was empty again. But a fresh concrete slab now covered most of the lot, perfectly smooth except for a square hatch near the center. No plumbing, no framing, no sign of a house. Just that hatch, painted gray to blend in. It looked wrong, too industrial for residential zoning. When I called the county inspector, they said no new permits had been filed. Phil confirmed the HOA had no record of a rebuild either. "She's going rogue again," he said. "What's her endgame?" That was the million-dollar question. By week 2, rumors were flying. Some neighbors claimed she was installing an underground bunker. Others said it was a wine cellar or an illegal storm shelter. One guy swore it was a hidden data server farm. But I had a simpler theory. She was up to something petty. Karen didn't do secrecy for grandeur, she did it for leverage. My proof came on a windy afternoon when I found a flyer taped to my mailbox. Pinewood Pavilion, grand reopening, now featuring Karen's vision of renewal. It had her face printed in soft focus, smiling like a saint. The event was scheduled for the weekend, with exclusive parking available for honored guests only. My address wasn't listed among them. That's when I understood. Whatever she'd built, it wasn't a home, it was a weapon. A way to make the neighborhood remember her power, even after losing every title she'd ever held. I decided to crash her grand reopening. Saturday arrived bright and smug, like the weather itself was on her payroll. The pavilion had been decorated with banners, white tents, and a catered buffet. Half the neighborhood showed up out of morbid curiosity. Karen stood at the entrance, dressed in an elegant cream suit, greeting everyone like she'd never been exiled. Her smile was the same one she used at HOA meetings, calm, practiced, and empty. I hung back at first, watching. The hatch across the street remained sealed, though I noticed fresh tire marks leading from it to the curb. Something had been rolled out of there recently, something heavy. When Karen finally spotted me, she didn't flinch. "Oh, look who decided to join the community again," she said. "I never left," I said. "You just couldn't see me from your tower." She gave that soft, dangerous chuckle. "Still building walls, I see. Only the kind that hold up." Before she could respond, Phil approached, clipboard in hand. "Karen, you still haven't submitted the safety inspection results for this event," he said. She waved him off. All handled. Handled by who? Me, she said simply. Phil frowned. That's not how inspections work. But she was already turning away, motioning for everyone to gather around the podium. Friends and neighbors, she began, her voice echoing through the pavilion's open space. Today we stand together to celebrate progress, renewal, forgiveness. Forgiveness. That word landed like a brick. Some people, she continued, glancing briefly at me, believe walls divide us. I believe they remind us where our strength begins. This pavilion is proof that even when we disagree, we can still build something beautiful. The applause that followed was polite but uncertain. She smiled wider, gesturing toward the buffet. Please, everyone, enjoy what your community has created. As people dispersed, I noticed a group of kids sneaking toward the hatch across the street. They were curious, like I'd been. I started to follow them, but before I could call out, the air filled with a low mechanical hum. The sound came from beneath the concrete lot. The hatch began to tremble. Then, slowly, it opened. A massive steel platform rose from the ground, like an elevator coming up from the earth. And on it sat a giant metal sculpture, a 10-foot-tall mock replica of my wall. Not a rough imitation, but an exact copy, stone for stone, ivy for ivy, except hers was painted gold and topped with a plaque that read, Community Triumph Over Division. The crowd gasped. She'd built a golden parody of my wall, out of sheer spite. Karen stepped forward, voice trembling with self-satisfaction. Behold! A symbol of harmony, built from conflict. A reminder that the community always wins. But then the platform groaned. The machine below it sputtered and jerked. Someone shouted, "Is that supposed to happen?" The mechanism screeched, tilted, then dropped a few inches with a heavy metallic thunk. The golden wall swayed. Karen froze, her confident smile cracking. Phil rushed forward. "Cut the power!" "Don't!" Karen yelled. "It's fine, it's perfectly safe." But it wasn't. The generator behind the lot began smoking, spilling thick black fumes. People screamed and backed away. The platform shuddered again, then crashed halfway down into the pit it came from. The golden wall split clean in two, collapsing into the opening with a thunderous echo. Dust filled the air, coating the entire pavilion in gray. When it cleared, Karen was standing there, covered in cement powder, her perfect cream suit turned ghost white. The golden wall lay shattered behind her, its plaque twisted and half buried. The silence that followed was absolute. Phil approached her cautiously. "Are you okay?" She didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the wreckage, on the failure she'd tried so hard to disguise as redemption. For the first time, she looked small. Not furious, not indignant, just defeated. The county inspector arrived 15 minutes later, lights flashing, clipboard ready. Someone had called emergency services after seeing smoke. As they assessed the scene, I stayed quiet, standing near my own wall, watching everything unfold like déjà vu history repeating itself. Only this time, I hadn't lifted a finger. When the officer finally asked who was responsible for the structure, Karen stepped forward shakily. "It was a community project," she said, voice cracking. "No," Phil said quietly. "It was yours." The inspector nodded grimly. "Unauthorized construction. Unsafe mechanical design. We'll need a full report." As they led her away for questioning, she looked back once, right at me. No words, just that hollow stare. Maybe she expected me to smile, or gloat, or at least nod. But I didn't. Because the truth was, I didn't feel victorious. Just tired. The next morning, the lot was cordoned off with caution tape. County crews dismantled what was left of the platform and filled the pit with gravel. The pavilion was temporarily closed, pending safety review. The neighborhood went quiet again, the kind of silence that follows too much noise. A few days later, an anonymous truck came and hauled away the remains of the Golden Wall. Karen's house went dark. No car, no movement, no sign she was still around. She'd finally vanished, for real this time. Weeks passed. Grass grew over the filled pit. The caution tape came down. The pavilion reopened under Phil's supervision, repurposed as a simple park. Kids played there again. Neighbors smiled at each other without suspicion. The air felt lighter, as if the whole community had exhaled. One evening, as I sat by my own wall with a glass of whiskey, I noticed something glinting near the base. A small bronze plaque, newly bolted into the stone. It read, "To boundaries well built and lessons well learned." No signature, but I knew who had left it. Karen, in her own twisted way, had given me a truce. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to outdo her. The war was over, not because one of us had won, but because there was nothing left to fight for. That night, as the sun dipped behind my stone battlements, I turned off the lights, let the ivy sway in the breeze, and realized something strange. I didn't hate the wall anymore. It wasn't a monument to conflict. It was a reminder of patience, of restraint, of the fine line between defending your peace and becoming the thing you're fighting. Somewhere out there, I like to think Karen had learned that too. Maybe not today, maybe not ever, but at least the neighborhood had. Because in Pinewood Estates, every fence, wall, and hedge now had a story behind it. And mine? Mine was just the loudest one that finally went quiet.